Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is August 9, 2024. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Also want to thank the Ann Arbor Film Festival and the book by James Joyce, Finnegan's Wake, for sort of connecting me to our guest today, Evan Meaney. Where in the heck you calling in from, Evan?
I'm from in Columbia, South Carolina.
Yeah, it was about 9 years ago we did part one, so it's an honor and a pleasure to do part two. In fact, just to plug it, you're in my book,
Yeah,
Strange Questions, Experimental Film as Conversation. How cool is that?
it's pretty
So,
cool.
yeah, um, Alan Turing said in the 50s, or he asked two questions. So I wanted to ask you those questions. First one is thinking a function of the soul?
So we're just starting with easy ones. Okay. All right. Good to know. Is thinking a function of the soul? I think that it predicates on belief in the soul. And I think those two are intertwined. Maybe thinking is the language by which we verify the soul.
We
Um,
verify it. Yeah.
yeah, it's like maybe a checksum. Yeah, that's a super man. You're that right out the gate. Yeah, that's a super good question. I don't have a very good answer for that, but I do think that it's linked in some kind of checksum capacity.
Yeah. I like it because I think people want to say, no, the brain is what causes thinking. Do you think thinking is innate or invented?
I think it's a word we gave to a thing that we were already doing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's not a Turing question. I just threw that on the side. The second Turing question was, can machines think?
If we say they can, then they can, right?
But I mean, everybody goes, that's the question of the set. That's what we're all worried about. AI is going to take us over. But I mean, again, then people usually go, well, it depends on what you mean by thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. I
You
mean
know,
that's the thing. I mean, I have as we might see, like I do work in that space now, and I've definitely seen interesting stuff come out of it for sure, but high level productive thought that gets me thinking in new ways. I haven't seen AI do that yet.
yeah,
I don't think I think that might come, but it's not there yet.
yeah. That's also what people say. I think it's coming, but it's not there yet. But here's another Turing line that kind of applies, and I'm curious your take on it, Evan. What we want is a machine that can learn from experience. Now, that's Turing saying 50 years ago. Now, your take, your hunch on that, what we want, is he talking about the highbrow intellectual IT people, the scientists, or is he talking about humanity in general? Just your hunch.
Again, yeah, hunch only, and I can't speak for Dr. Turing. I think in a productive capacity, he was talking about the scientific community because there's so much that you need to do to reinvent the wheel every time you want to spin something up.
Yeah.
We've gotten better at that, and you know, a thing that learns from experience. I honestly, I would love humans that learn from experience. I think that would be a great first step before we get machines that learn from experience. But yeah, I again, I can't speak for Dr. Turing. I would love it across the board.
Yeah. Great, great. Now, that word experience would go back. McLuhan said, everybody experiences far more than they understand. Yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. Now, I'm going to tell you what I think he meant. Doesn't mean I'm right. And then you can suss it out. I think he's kind of inferring that if the kid comes in from the cold and the parent goes, don't touch the stove, it will burn your hands. That's experience. If the parent goes, oh, you can get your hands warm if you get really close to the stove and rub them together, that's trying to teach understanding the dynamics of heat. So I think what he's saying is, well, we should be learning from understanding, but we more so learn from experience. Now
I think,
I can read the quote again if you want, but you go ahead, whatever you think. Any
yeah,
idea.
I mean, experience is faster, right? You know, there's a lot of I mean, I'd like to think I'm, moderately smart, and there's lots of things that I do in my life that I do, but I don't really understand why I do them. I just do them.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that it's either experience, either constructed in my mind or lived and, procedural. But I think that teaches so much more than understanding. If I had to wait before I understood things to act, I think I wouldn't be able to do anything.
Right, and it's funny because T.S. Eliot said that poetry can communicate before it's understood.
Yeah. Which, we started on the soul. Maybe that's the part of me that I don't have access to all the time trying to
Right,
talk to me.
right. So now let's go into this one. What's the difference between art and science?
Nothing. Zero. Yeah.
That's good. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of try to suss this out. Here's McLuhan. When we push our paradigms back, we get history. When we push them forward, we get science.
I'd like maybe to amend. When we push them forward, we get creation, and that's science or art, whichever you want to take it. Um, I feel like the boundaries between those two spaces at the high levels get so arbitrary and confused. I understand, like, at a collegiate level, it's important to separate them because you need to have someone take biology and have someone take, French history and literature. But when you get up, it's about the introduction and production and maintenance of new ideas and application of those ideas, and those generally require everyone to be working in a open-minded space. And
Right.
so, you know, I in fact, like, I've kind of stopped using the term, like, artist in general, not as a reaction, but just it's not accurate anymore, to what I really do. So I just like to say, oh, I make things. Um,
That's
and
nice.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and however you want to define that, great, cool, I love it. But I'll just keep making stuff.
I like to put an F in front of the word art and put what do you call those things? I don't know. Grammar.
Parentheses, brackets.
Parentheses around the F. So I'm a fartiste.
But then it becomes a function of art, right? Like you're
Yeah,
finding the function of art, which is good.
right. But it's also you go to the Balinese, Marshall's favorite quote, the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can.
I like that a lot.
But I mean, then as soon as you apply the word make, then you're like, oh, I'm doing something. Whereas some people just exist. Oh, I know the greatest artist in Venice, California. He goes, art isn't.
Do less, man. Do less. I love it. That's so good.
But I mean, he works his butt off. I mean, all he does is draw and paint all the time, and he doesn't need, it's just he's driven, you know.
Yeah.
But it so here's Jean Cocteau. Art is science made clear.
Ooh. I I don't know. I don't know if I buy that one because, like, a lot of the art I enjoy makes things less clear. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and especially, spending as much time in the sciences, or however you want to define it, as I do sometimes, like, there really is a drive for clarity there, especially in certain sectors, because clarity means efficiency, which can mean safety, but it can also mean, like, more money and, that sort of thing. And I think all the art I'm really drawn to tries to blow up that paradigm.
Yeah.
I think the last time we spoke, we were talking about Elden Ring, the video game, and Elden Ring is really tricky for people to get into because it's so obtuse. There's very little player help there, and I
Yeah.
I love that. Because, if I have a minder, or if I have, like, a sitter or someone telling me where I'm supposed to be going, then it's an exercise. Then I'm like, okay, then I just go here and I do this thing. Um, but when you have to kind of parse out a strange riddle to figure out where you need to go next and really think about it, get to the point where you're like, I think I need to take a walk and, like, really think about what this means and come back. I think that's the kind of art I'm moved to to which things become less and less clear.
Yeah. Like you said, what's the best thing for a human being? You said rest. Now, have you ever revisited the interview 9 years ago, either in the book or on archive.org?
I have actually, and
Like
you know,
when?
it's
Recently or a long time ago?
so I did maybe 2 years ago, and then I listened to a bit of it earlier that, when we got in contact again for this. But I think that you go back and you listen to yourself and you look back with equal parts pride. You're like, oh, that was kind of clever. And then you listen to one more thing. You're like, oh, buddy, what were you thinking? And
Cringe, yeah.
I think that's good though. I think
Yeah,
I think we should be constantly looking at ourselves with a mixture of pride and cringe, right?
of
Because
course.
it shows
That
where we
is
are no longer.
it's so good because I've done about 1,000 interviews in 40 years. I never listened to them. When I did the book, I was sort of forced to go over them, but in text, because someone else transcribed them, and then we would review it. And you can listen to yours and read the book, and there's differences. There's
Yeah.
it's cleaned up, but what happened was when COVID started, I really rushed you through that first one 9 years ago. I'm like, "Phew, I want to get the 90 minutes." And over the last year-ish, I've kind of slowed down and let people kind of suss it out slower. And then I go, "Hey, why don't we do a part 2?" And so then in doing a part 2, I take notes, but I have to kind of review it so I don't ask all the same questions. Because I was going to ask you right off the bat, Evan, hey, can we just do the same interview all over again and see how much it changed? And I was tempted to ask you pick, but then I just says, no, I got so many new things, and it makes me go and listen now. And I really realize how I cut people off and blah blah blah. But it is fun because I kind of get to revisit these important conversations I have with people. The thing you just said, though, it reminds me of what I say. Great art fucks your shit up and says to you, I can do that. Or, makes you say, I can do that.
Yeah. I used to have a poetry professor who would I think they were quoting their poetry professor.
Yeah.
And they said that poetry is rooted in the body, and anyone who tells you differently is full of shit. And I think about that a lot, especially in academic art, and then it definitely experimental film. There's so much. What's always this performance of cerebral action,
Yeah.
which sometimes is very genuine. I'm definitely guilty of it. But I think the best artworks I've seen have activated me in a physical way. Um,
Oh,
and confuse and upset me in interesting ways, productively. I'm not saying everything needs to be like, the worst thing you've ever seen all the time and you need to be on the
yeah.
edge of stress. But I think there's and maybe I'm getting a little older. Maybe it's just post COVID. You sort of look at this differently. But I've been really interested in like artworks that portray tenderness and
Yeah.
kindness in
Yeah.
interesting ways. And honestly, I see that a lot in the cartoons. Like
Yeah.
modern cartoons are just so incredibly kind and tender and thoughtful,
Yeah.
and I think it's so incredibly beautiful. And I feel that in a physical way that I didn't necessarily feel. Like I physically feel relief in a
Yeah.
strange way. Um,
Well, you really got ESP because I want to return to art and science, but let's do this tangent onto poetry for a second because what you said was amazing. Poetry is rooted in the body. I'm going to Google that and see who originally said it. You don't know. You're saying your poetry teacher got it from another poetry person.
yes, I believe
Yeah,
so.
that's really cool. Now, a couple poetry things because one thing there's four things that you list that you like. One of them is poetry of hexadecimal code. Hexadecimal code. What
Yeah.
what is that?
So
First of all,
underneath, most people engage in hex code by it's color hex codes. You'll see it in HTML, but any file can be represented hexadecimally. It's a step up from binary code. So
Yeah.
it's like a little bit more. And when I was used to make, when I used to make like the glitch artworks, I would engage them on a hexadecimal level because it was a little bit easier to inject code into that, because it had romance-based characters in it. You had a little bit more leeway than just on and off. So I think there is a nice poetry. I also think that it's a nice poetry of the idea that our language, the most beautiful ideas that we could possibly have as a species can get reduced out of our brains, and then they get filtered into language, which is already like a bastardization of the thing we're trying to say, and then they get bastardized further into hex code and binary code and assembly code. We just keep getting further and further away from this thing that we never really had in the first place. Like, I tell my students this all the time. The minute we get telepathy as a species, and the minute I can just like put my thoughts in your head in the context that they exist in my head, so not just like the word, but the idea and the feeling and the way I feel about it, whatever, Photoshop goes away forever. We're never touching art ever again. It's done. Because why would you waste time with that? If I can put the way I feel into you without having to go through a medium, art's toast that day. I don't think that'll ever happen. So we
Well,
can
no,
still.
I'll ask you, when Vinnie Colaiuta and Frank Zappa are jamming, the band's just comping, and the drummer and the guitarist are on another level, and there's no words involved. It's like they're anticipating kind of where you're going to hit that, and I'm going to hit this. I would say some musicians are like Coltrane with his classic quartet. Elvin and McCoy Tyner, those guys were on that kind of level almost. You think that's kind of what you're talking about or not?
I think so. When I leave my house for the day and I like take my keys and I leave and I tell my partner, like, I'm like, I love you, and then I go out the door, that I love you is a culmination of like everything I understand about love and partnership and kindness and like our shared history and my history. And like, I want to also like, it's like, oh, if I get in a horrible car accident on the way out, like I want the last thing you hear from me to be, I love you. So it's like this weird mortality element, and it's like, blah, blah, blah. And all that kind of falls out of my dumb mouth is I love you. And then I leave. It's like the thing that we say is always this pale comparison to what's in our heads.
Yeah.
And so I think that an idea of like, if I could put all of that in my audience's head or in a person's head, just like that, then we don't spend time trying to force our experiences in the language. We don't spend time forcing that language into art. We just kind of could share ourselves in the raw. But again, then that's science fiction at this point. So I always tell my students that art is proto telepathy. You're trying to create a context for someone, and that goes poorly because we have to rely on language to do it.
Well, that's funny because Gary Snyder, the nature beat poet, said poetry is seeing the world without language, then putting that seeing into language.
Yeah.
Is that
that resonates for sure
with what you just said?
Yeah. But again, it's you're trying to get around. You're trying to take in a linguistic element and put it into language, which.
That's Igor Stravinsky says music expresses itself.
Yeah.
Then he gave lectures on how music means nothing. and then Zappa trumped him. He sings the line in one of his songs, "Nothing is what I want."
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, that's just him mocking Zen. But here is Muriel Ruckensers. I don't know who it is. Art creates meeting places. Poetry creates democracy.
Whoa.
What do you, suss that out? I don't even know what it means. What do you think?
Poetry creates democracy.
Art creates meeting places. So we're sort of, we're sharing, and then poetry creates democracy.
Yeah, I'm too dumb for that one. That one's too good. That one's way too good. Yeah. I I don't have a critique of it. That's an
Right.
awesome line.
That's
I
that's
love
fine. That's totally. I'm not after critique or anything.
yeah,
It's just what I'm
appreciation.
after is any, well, not even appreciation, is any uh uh response. Yeah, that's fine. And so this is McLuhan, and this one I've been trying to figure out for years. How about technologies as the collective unconscious and art as the collective unconsciousness? So he's sort of saying there's two things. There's conscious and consciousness. And then technologies are a collective unconscious, and art is a collective unconscious. He's not even saying that's what it is. He's just saying, how about this as an idea? You know, that's what I like. He's not trying to convince you. He's just saying, hey, how about this? And some people say, well, conscious is this and consciousness is that. So I don't know. Any thoughts on it?
Yeah, that's solid. I don't know if I spend time parsing out conscious and consciousness and
Yes. Yeah.
unconscious and unconsciousness.
Yeah.
Um, there's a chef I really like named Matty Matheson, and
Yeah.
he does a couple YouTube cooking shows. It's actually some of his stuff is amazing. It's if David Lynch made a cooking show, it'd be this.
Yeah.
Um, but at the start of one of them, he just goes, "Did dinosaurs exist? Does God exist? I don't know. Stop asking me the hard questions." And I, and I just, and I just think I'm like, yeah, man. Like I get that. And it's one of those things where I'm definitely not interested in yucking anyone's yum on this. Like if that parsing that is valuable to somebody or useful
Yeah.
or interesting,
Yeah.
go for it.
No,
But
that's
for me, yeah,
and then here's Mallarmé is a symbolist poet. He basically taught us you don't paint the painting, you paint the effect you want
hmm,
on the, and that's, he got that for Edgar Allan Poe, which is
yeah.
inventing the detective novel, reasoning backwards, effects precede causes. It's like, I'm only going to tell you a little bit of this information, then you will want to fill in the missing parts, and then you'll be involved. Like, wow, I know what's going to happen next. So this guy who just studied Mallarmé's poetry, Louis Bersani, said the very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. So I'm curious, just like in your work, the very crises, and I don't like the right word crisis, the very challenge that threatens, I don't like threatens, that causes the making of your work sustains your composition. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, and maybe this might be a wild interpretation. Clearly, smarter people have done this. But the idea, T.S. Eliot's use of crisis when, do I have to push the moment to this crisis? Um, I think crisis is a moment of transformation,
Yeah.
and when all transformation is brave, like all transformation is hard. And all transformation, whether conscious or unconscious, is something that takes energy and effort and spell slots and mana and all the things. And
Yeah.
so I definitely think that I used to make work, I think, in an emotionally unsustainable way. I would derive that from like pain that I wasn't fully processing, or those sorts of elements. I think I'm better about that now. But some of the work that I make now is still engaged in that crisis, but it's more of I want to get to a place where I understand something a little bit better. And whether that's a personal thing or whether that's a structural thing, it there's like this whole world of YouTube tutorials. Like you can kind of learn anything on the internet these days. And I think that I go on like a very specific creative and emotive journey when I make a thing. And I feel like that's like this passive YouTube tutorial of how to engage with something that I'm engaging with, or overcome something I'm overcoming, or work with something I'm working. Um, like a couple of years ago, I made this VR piece called "My Garden's a Real Piece of Shit." It's about a garden that you can like uh, use scissors to kind of pull weeds out of, and so like the user plays with that, and flowers start growing, and it's really good. And then eventually, like a weed will grow up, but the weeds don't look like weeds. They're these like error messages that say things like, your search history is public knowledge. this is why your mother died. These are, the
Yeah.
people you love you don't love you, like all of those intrusive thoughts. And when you try to cut them down, you end up clipping the flowers, because I fudged the colliders. So there's no real way to do it without hurting the flowers. And eventually the flowers catch on fire and the garden burns down. And the only way that cannot happen is if you just let the weeds grow. You just say, like, you know what, these are thoughts you're going to have, and they're part of it. And that was like this real moment of acceptance once I sort of thought, like, oh yeah, that's just a thing that's going to happen to me. I'm fine with it. And if I can create an artwork that shows me kind of interfacing with that in a productive way, maybe other people can interface with that in a productive way through modeling. So that's that's my very long-winded answer that probably isn't really an answer.
No, it helped me a lot, because see, I shouldn't kind of apologize for Leo's words. I go, the very crises and threatens. I should just leave it, because I usually do. I just go, the very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. And when you suss out that word crises for me, it helps me understand what he was trying to say better. And especially in regards to your own work, Evan, was totally evoked a graffiti I saw in a back alley dumpster diving in Venice. It said, "Weeds are flowers too once you get to know them."
I love that.
And that's A.A. Milne.
That's so good.
The Winnie the Pooh guy wrote that. And I mean, the great thing is I see it in a dirty, funky alley, because in the alleys you see a lot of great flowers too. They're not just in the front of the houses and all cultivated, So that to me is one of the greatest lines ever.
That's a really good one. I like that one a lot.
Because I with the homeless situation, that's why, well, homeless are real people once you get to know them too, come on.
They're real people before you get to know them too.
Hello. In fact, Michael Ventura said one of the most moving things ever. He said, the best thing you can do with a homeless person is look them in the eyes.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So, now back to art and science, because, I think it's sort of like jujitsu. This word etymologically, it breaks down. Ju is softness or gentleness. Jutsu is art and science. So I'm almost back to your tenderness. I mean, jujitsu is that push and pull, right? So, I'm curious, because you go, I'm not into binaries in the last interview, but I was like, well, isn't that what everything is based on? Light and dark, hot and cold, and so any ideas on that, that breakdown of jujitsu, because that's the push and pull, right?
I think binaries are easy to categorize, and I think binaries, and if I'm being like kind of crass here, are easy to market to.
Right.
I think that's a thing. But even there's two ways that computers generally produce images: rasters and vectors. So rasters are when you use like a Photoshop or you take an image, it's gonna like make pixels, right? And the more pixels you have, the better. And it's gonna, even if you take like a circle, it's going to like make that circle, but it's going to make it out of pixels, which are square. So if you zoom in close enough, even though it's binary and it's just turning pixels on and off, you're actually faking a circle, because it's not really a circle. And one could argue even vector images, which are created through effectively math that creates the image, are produced on a screen, and that screen has pixels. So you're still seeing an interpretation of it. So, computers and the screens that we're looking at are giving us this binary interpretation of organic shapes and organic ideas. And it can only do it sort of. Right. And it gets close enough. And I'm a big believer in close enough. Like, I love close enough. And for most of our things, close enough is there. But this is a thing that I work with my students to try to see is like, hey, just so we're clear, you're always existing in the space between binaries. Yeah. We can pretend we're not, and we can still use Photoshop, and we can still make, movies and stuff. But it's important that you understand the underpinning of this is an illusion. It's a fugazi. It's a fraud, effectively.
It's amazing. It's McLuhan called it the resonating interval. That tactility isn't one hand touching the other hand. Tactility is the space between when they're not touching. And it's go ahead.
From an electron perspective, they're never touching.
They're never touching.
They're
Exactly.
never touching.
Well, here's Arthur Clarke. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah. But I would, okay, so so I play a astonishing amount of tabletop role-playing games. And when you play enough Dungeons and Dragons, you start to think about, like, okay, what does a magical society look like? And you think, like, okay, well, if you can, like, cast a small early level 1 spell and heal someone, okay, cool. Disease does not exist. And if you're like, I can wave my wand and there's, like, housing, it's just like, oh, like, wow. And this is my super lefty take, but in a magical society, capitalism gets really strange. I don't know how it works in that capacity. So if we're talking about technology as a substitute for magic, we really do need to, pull the trick and take magic to its full extent, because magic is always applied. This idea that it's always useful in some real truth. So it's not just, the abracadabra and the flowers appear and the dove appears. I think if we take that meaning, all technology, if it does lead to magic, all magic leads to a more egalitarian space. And that is the trajectory that we kind of do need to accept.
What's egalitarian mean?
Egalitarian means if you can use magic to produce something out of nothing, then we get into a space where there just isn't scarcity. And if there isn't scarcity, then we can have in a more egalitarian space. This is the thing where people get caught up on AI that I think is really interesting. First off, any conversation about AI that doesn't have also a conversation about, universal basic income and displacement, I don't think is a serious conversation. But the other side of it is that, that magic that we're doing with AI to create art or to create whatever, it's not coming from nowhere. Powering AI is this unfathomable thing that we're not tackling yet correctly.
Yeah.
It draws an astonishing amount of power, and that power has got to come from somewhere. And if you go into those board meetings right now, they're basically talking about two things: a commercialized version of licensing for their training data. Getting on training data is really tricky, and then power. How do we power the magic? So for Clarke, we can just have this technology which borders on magic, but it always has this physical component that we need to negotiate. The Death Star is a great example of that. Like, that was powered by kyber crystals, so it's effectively magic. We don't have to talk about it. But, like, where did that power come from? Like, how are we drawing the power to fuel the technology, to fuel the magic? And that's always something I'm trying to think about.
That's good. Really evoked. I heard on the radio just a brief moment. It says, AI is in its infant stage and it's our job to raise it well.
Future's going to be real interesting.
And I think, Evan, the thing, me dropping quotes all the time, I learned from studying Harold Bloom, is it's how you put the aphorism, the maxim, or the cute quote into context, and then how you transform it, how you take it a little farther. Don't just settle for that's an epiphany. Wow, that's a cool thought. Move on. So here's Warren Ellis said, he reworded Arthur Clarke. Here's two rewordings of Arthur Clarke. Ellis, any sufficiently advanced civilization is indistinguishable from its nature.
I love that a lot. Yeah. That sounds amazing.
And then here's Bruce Sterling. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from its garbage.
I mean, those are kind of the same thing, right?
Well, nature and garbage. Yeah. Like, who invented garbage? Who invented waste?
A weed is a pretty good flower once you get to know it.
Yeah. Okay, here's McLuhan in 69 on Joyce. For James Joyce has solved numerous problems which science has not yet formulated as problems.
I have no notes on that. That's just correct. I
Oh,
full
yeah,
agree.
yeah. No, it's funny
Strong
because
agree.
it reminds me of Tony Conrad said artists break rules before they're made.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then here's Einstein. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science.
Yeah.
So,
A million percent.
yeah.
Yeah. It's the reason we do things, because we don't know things and we'd like to know things. So we keep probing and looking and exploring and trying to contextualize, and the things we can easily contextualize, I think, become studyable in a more structured way. So the traditional understanding of art and engineering, and the things we still haven't figured out great ways to categorize our art. I always think like art is the R&D side of society, right? Like what we do that we haven't quite figured out yet.
Research and development side.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that is good. R&D side of society. That's what art is, really.
Yeah. They're just trying to work out things we haven't figured out yet.
Yeah. But then both Warhol and McLuhan said art is anything you can get away with. And I said that to one guy and he goes, that sounds like Trump.
You know, there is a school of thought of it is a performance art piece that has gone wildly out of hand.
Oh my God, it's total performance art. I mean, when that guy, is it Putin? He learned from one of Russia's greatest performance artists. Did you know that? I mean, literally, this is true. And our friend, a political activist, he got mad at us. I goes, dude, I'm not encouraging that or saying that. I'm saying I read it and it felt like it was a legitimate source. He goes, that's horrible. That's not true. I was like, okay, sorry. But here's the etymology on a science is the fact or state of knowing. So that's sort of interesting where the word came from, because, you know, with me in etymology is about every fifth word I look up. Etymology Online is my favorite website. Every fifth word I look up, it says of unknown origin. It's like perfect. Every word is of unknown origin. Some person made up and says, well, we got this word from this.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean, you know, it doesn't mean we did. They just did the scientific research, right? To say, oh, we think we got it from this.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm no linguist, but there's some really beautiful stuff with that we're seeing now, because, you know, like with hyper social media, so like TikTok, right? Things can happen so quickly and become part of a lexicon so quickly and then lose so quickly. I forget where I saw it, but there's like a young linguist. He's very good. He's on TikTok and he'll, you know, do these little bursts, like 1 minute lessons. Yeah. And his conclusion was, he said, he's like, we come up with micro dialects. And you have a micro dialect with people in your life. Like any one or more people will have a micro dialect that they create. And I was thinking like, oh, like with my close friends, I do. Like there are words that we've constructed that, or like repurposed, that mean a thing, and it only means a thing to like 3 people in the world.
Yeah.
And the ending of this person's video said, and you create a micro dialect with every person you're like in a romantic relationship with. And when you break up with that person, that language dies. And my whole day, I was like, wow, okay, cool. So the preservation of language is the preservation of what we talk to each other about. Like that is what happens. So I was pretty on board with that.
You packed a lot in there, Evan, because our Finnegan's Wake Reading Club after 28 years, one of the most astute observations was this woman goes, "Oh, I get it. It's like that secret language you invent with your best friend or your brother or sister when you're a kid so you can talk around your parents. You know,
Yeah.
you talk in code."
Yeah. I love that.
And it's micro dialect. Yeah, that's what I always say. Joyce invented the internet and disguised it as a book. And here's what now I'm going to change it to: Joyce invented micro dialect. What do you call, what's the noun? Dialect
Just a micro
making?
dialect.
Oh, Joyce invented micro dialect and disguised it as a book. Okay, here's one more.
I
Go
think
ahead.
Joyce, and we should get t-shirts made up that said Joyce invented the internet. I think that's awesome. That's really good.
Yeah, that's like at Black Lives Matter, I saw a t-shirt. The Matrix is a documentary.
The Matrix is a documentary. Yeah.
The star of The Matrix came into our bookstore when it came out,
With
Keanu Reeves,
Keanu
and,
Reeves, really?
and he bought every McLuhan book.
Correct. Good.
Yeah.
Very good. That's,
Yeah.
I would expect nothing less.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a French archaeologist historian. Science finds no truths. It discovers unknown facts that can be interpreted 1,000 ways.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see this all the time, right? Like you see it in news all the time where
Yeah.
a scientist will, a group of scientists or a group of researchers will find a small thing that they are categorizing as a data point, and it leads to further questions, and then a newspaper will get a hold of it and say like, okay, scientists discovered a cure for whatever, and they're like, nope, we found a marker for one thing that suggests 3 other things that we're going to go explore when we get more grant funding. And it's, we're always we're repolishing the same questions. It's just they turn into more questions. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And the things we do get discrete answers for, are I don't know how valuable discrete answers are these days. Like I'm not sure what that means anymore.
Yeah.
I think we've many of us have gotten past that of like asking questions with discrete answers, because if the answer exists, I can find it with a couple of searches, and then I don't have a question anymore. So questions with discrete answers have really short lifespans.
Yeah, I know you're a fan of John Cage like me, and when Cage was asked a question, he goes, "That's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer."
Yeah.
I said that once to a student at Cal Arts, and everybody laughed. But she gave me an evil eye, like, dude, that's a fucking bullshit comical answer. You didn't answer me. She says, "How do you make your living?" And I go, "I do nothing effectively." And everybody laughed, ha 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 ha. And then she looked at me and like it's like burned in my skull forever. Like she knew that I was just bullshitting, but in a way I don't do anything. Somehow I exist. But this, you covered the whole science page. Look at that. Wow, the whole page. Okay, but here's one of the art pages that I just came up with, and it starts with Milan Kundera, The Unbearable Likeness of Being. This is why I love writing, because the character that I'm writing about can go further than I can. That sounds like woo woo. Yeah, right. You're going to write a character, ink on paper, and then the character's going further. Well, that sounds like, what we aspire art does. And then isn't that what science does? You write a formula and then it goes further. So any thoughts on that line?
Oh yeah, again, 100% true, right? So this is old hat at this point, but something you try to tell your students is like, hey, you read a book, you watch a movie, you play a game, do something like that. The ideas you produce from that don't necessarily have to align with the creator's ideas. They are sites of cultural production. So if this gives you a great idea, you know, Kundera might be the grandparent of that idea for sure,
Yeah.
but you're the progenitor of that idea. So it's completely fine and good and encouraged even to do that. And even if it goes against the author, I mean, I think we see this right now too with wildly let's create a wildly popular fictional British author who created an important children's book that had an effect on many people. Um, and maybe that group of people who love those books have outgrown that author. Um, that's fine. That's fine. If those books are giving you something of value where you can produce cultural products of your own and ideas and great thoughts off of it, cool, keep going with it, right? We don't necessarily have to live in the cage that the author built for themselves, and we can live outside of it.
Wow, because Faulkner said sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Because I did hear the word truth come up a lot in our part one. And this is like, oh, well, I'm a vehicle and it's coming through me. In fact, Dante prayed to the muse to aid him. And
Yeah.
then some people go, that's bullshit. That I don't go with that vehicle muse stuff, that it's ego. And we don't know if it's more ego or more you're a vehicle. But when I ask that question, is it more ego or more vehicle? Most people go, no, you can't make art that's egoless. And then, you can, right? You can make art that's egoless.
I can't. I can't. If I want to. Obviously, you want to believe you're like the universe is speaking through me. I am but a vessel for such glory and beauty. But like, no, I like hearing my own voice. I am a bag of meat that likes itself, and
Yeah.
I think that I get really concerned when people don't see that. And like, obviously, when I was younger, I wanted to think that I was more important to the culture than I was. But now you sort of recognize like why do you do things, and you create challenges yourself that you think you can accomplish.
Yeah.
I have like a history of this, of like wanting to climb specific mountains that I think are valuable, but I in no way think that it's the universe offering me a challenge that I must. It's just no, it's like I wanted to be on the top of that hill, so I went to the top of the hill, and I was proud of myself when I got to that top of the hill. And now I'm looking for more hills.
Yeah, we're looking for more hills because back to poetry, Auden said the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us.
I mean, if it doesn't activate you, it's not art, right? There was a woman I worked with when I taught at the University of Tennessee named Carrie Staples. She is a designer, amazing, amazing. She's wonderful,
Yeah.
and she really baked my noodle one day with this one question. She sits with me and she goes, "What's the opposite of aesthetic?"
Yeah.
And I didn't know the answer at the time, and I was like, "Oh, I don't know. Like, is it banal?" And she goes, "You know the word. You've heard it before." And I was like, "No, I don't think that's true." And she goes, "It's anesthetic, like numb." And like
And the,
you could see the cartoon head explode, and I was like, "Oh boy, that's so good." So if something's activating you, it's art. If it's numbing you, then it's anesthetic. I think about
yeah.
that a lot.
That's really, it's so funny you said that because I read that line. Auden doesn't say that, but there's a line that he implies that we go to art as an anesthetic. That's why we go to art. A lot of people go to art. They don't, I mean, don't you find you're unusual in the world that you want art to fuck your shit up and you want it to turn your mistakes into, I mean, consciously articulating it, Evan.
Yeah, I think so.
What's that line you use in all your lectures? I'm a something motherfucker. I forgot you said I'm a something fucker. Uh, I wish I wrote, I was supposed to write it down, but it's sort of like you're kind of like degrading yourself a little because you're doing not what you're supposed to be doing.
Oh yeah, I yes. So I am drawn towards things that confuse. Like I like genuinely being confused because that gives me a starting place.
Right.
Um, I don't find pleasure, and this is like I have certain experimental genres do not work on me like at all. Um, because I'm just I want something that gives me a puzzle that I can do while the project is running, and then I can solve the puzzle along with the project. This is why I responded to structural films really strongly, because you're trying to uncover the rule set for the movie or for the painting or for this.
Yeah.
And in college, I would watch movies where they would say, "Well, just like let go and enjoy the beauty of what's on screen." And I was like, "That is not possible. That is not something that I can do." Um, you know, the last time I relaxed as a human being, I was 12 years old, and after that, it's just been whatever since. Um, and I think that that's kind of the move for me. Like I like the tension, I like the crisis.
Yes.
Um, but that is also not for everyone. I will also, at this point in my life, understand that absolutely a mechanism of privilege, 100%, because there are a lot of people out there who need media to calm, to center, to escape, to
Right.
divorce, to do whatever. And I think that there's like so much value in that specific effort. So for me to like crave the tension might be a sign of privilege for sure, but then it's also just it ruins a lot of artwork for me, I think.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really beautiful stuff out there that I think I'm just immune to because it's too calm and I don't recognize it.
Is it what's the best thing for a human being, Evan, part one? To relax. And
It's really,
you said from age 10 on, I stopped relaxing. Is that what you
well,
just said?
yeah, well,
Age
of course I age 12, but of course I
age
like of course I fetishize relaxing. Like that sounds amazing. I'm really bad at it. I'm bad at that. I'm bad at sleeping. I'm bad at taking vacations.
but you don't regret it, it doesn't seem. You take pride and teach people that you can turn your breakdowns into a breakthrough.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, you totally can. But also, but I recognize that humans need rest. Like if if I got out there and seriously said like, "Hey, everyone, be like me," that would be a bad scene. We don't want that. I think people need to take care of themselves. I just think one of the ways I take care of myself is I constantly have that Rubik's cube where I can,
right.
be fiddling. I it's funny. Like I'm working on a application right now, and like sometimes I go in and just refactor some of my code just because I'm like, this is my Zen garden. Like I like making things cleaner and smoother.
Yeah.
Um, I love cooking. Like I'm a big kitchen person, and like if you look in my refrigerator, everything is like labeled and dated and like organized, and like I that brings me calm. Where I feel like that would stress out a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay, so this is Mike Kelly. Any comment? Art is making your problems other people's problems.
100 million%. Yeah.
100
Yeah.
million. Okay, here's poet Fanny Howe. The point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't.
Sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes. Um, but I also think that it can like inversely, it can be shown as a modeling for that life is worth living because you're feeling stuff because you're experiencing it. Um, yeah, that's a quote I need to think about a little bit more. That's a good one.
I know I cannot get that one, but I'm glad you said sometimes. And then Mel Rowe, the guy who says museum without walls. Art is to transfer destiny into awareness. So I'll
Hmm.
couch it with Hollis Frampton. A narrative was born out of the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think, obviously there's some byproduct there, but the big feels that we get as humans, as a species, like love and death and fear, like, hey, at the end of all of this, you're gonna go away, and you don't know when that's gonna happen. You don't know the context of it, and now go to work. I guess like go to the store, go do your laundry. Also, one day you're absolutely gonna disappear, and that's that. It's like there's you can't. I don't think we can exist like that. It's why, like, when you go to a hospital, if unfortunately, if they're telling you like, hey, you're terminal, you're going to die, like there's always a person there to, oh, there's a jet flying over. There's always a person there to counsel you, because our brains are just not equipped to handle that level of mortality, right from the jump. So I think that anytime we're engaging with those sort of big feelings, um, it's always bound in that mortal thing of like, how do we filter the thing we're feeling into a way that we can actually exist? And that's a really tricky thing to do. And that's, I think, where we find artwork in solace. There was a moment, like I was in 6th grade. Or maybe I was it's like early middle school, high school, and I was a counselor in training at a kids camp in New York. And out of nowhere, this one person preternaturally gave me Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. She was like, you should read this. You'd like this. And like, first off, who's giving that to a 7th grader? Like, no one should do that. And I read it and I was like, I've never read anything like this. This is completely new to me. This is brand new and wild. And then like later in my life, when I would experience like trauma or pain or joy or whatever, something that I was like, it was like too far out of my comfort zone for me to contextualize, I would go back to like a couple of the chapters, but specifically the chapter on joy and sorrow. And Gibran says, like, the same cup that holds your wine is burned in the potter's oven. And I was like, oh wow, okay, so like you're giving me a roadmap for emotions that I am absolutely not equipped. Like, you're installing software in my brain to let me comprehend being alive later. And that's why I think like artwork is so important, especially early. Like, if you can get someone invested in artwork in like that level of like 9, 10, 11, 12, even if you don't explain it, even if you just say like, hey, just log this away, because later this might mean something to you and might provide solace.
Yeah. It's funny because I dumpster dove a copy of The Prophet and they got notes in it, so I can't really return it to the bookstore for credit. And I give it to my book guy, and he's like, he's already read it. And this morning I was like, where do I put this? Because I don't want to put it in the garbage. And so I put it back in his box, and he'll go, oh, I've already read this. Put it in one of those mini free libraries. But Evan, really that was leading to, Melrose, transfer of destiny into awareness, in the whole Hollis Frampton quote. Here's what I've asked people since I did ask you 9 years ago. Can you forget to die?
Proactively, yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Retroactive.
I'm begging people to say yes. No one says yes. And here's the thing. How do you think most people take that question? More literally or more metaphorically?
I mean, I think they're taking it literally, right?
Most people go, no, you can't forget to die. And when someone says yes, I'm like, thank God. Go ahead.
There's that great Douglas Adams quote where he says, anyone can fly, you just throw yourself at the ground and miss. Right? So until the choice is taken out of your hands, sure, forget to die. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe that's an extension of the thing I was talking about, where we can't comprehend what that means all the time. So, there's no way you would sit and fold laundry if your time on Earth is limited. So you're just like, all right, well, let's forget about that for a little while. Let's forget to die so I can make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and eat it. And then later, maybe we can go think more about dying.
I've done that. It took me 70 years. When I do the laundry, which I do in our household, I just grab the sheets and roll them up in a ball and shove them in the shelf now. And my wife is really like, she folds and puts them up. But it's like, why do you take the time to fold it? What's the difference? A sheet just is okay. Here's a little delve into archive. The word is from the 1400s, means keep safe, free from harm. 200 years later, 1600s, it's what we think of it as, record preserved as evidence. But it was Charles Baudelaire said, if you try to make a statement that's long, deep, and rich, it will age very fast. If you try to only own the day you're talking, it will last forever. You know,
Yeah.
David Lee Roth flipped it, here today, gone later today. But it's like, be here now. Isn't the purpose of life to live in the moment, be here now? So, and Wyndham Lewis said, artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. So why do we have to save stuff? I know studying history and all that. I go to a library every day of my life, but I love that the futurists said burn all the libraries and destroy all the museums. I like that they came up with that idea. But why do humans feel about, is this need to archive more innate or more invented?
I think it's practical, right? So invented, but it's
Oh,
practical, right?
oh, you do say it's invented then?
Yeah. I mean, we aren't naturally archiving things, right? In fact, we work with great effort to archive and to catalog and to preserve. We add to the archive for sure, all the time, but who's maintaining that archive? That's the question. Um, you know, I I'm married to an archivist, right? I see the immense amount of work that goes into just preserving and maintaining things, and that is deeply unnatural. And I don't mean that poorly. I mean it good. Like it's great, it's amazing, but it's hard work and it's conscientious work, and oftentimes it's thankless work, right? Because especially with the invention of hyper distributed web tech, right? You just sort of say like, oh, everything's archived, but that's absolutely not true. Even websites like there's this weird gully of non-preservation from like 1995 to let's say 2010, where like lots of parts of the website, the global internet are just gone, because they're not being archived in the same way. Same thing with like
They're
you could
not
argue,
on they're not on the Wayback Machine?
no, because they worked on different web standards, and the Wayback Machine only it only preserves like the HTML, right? So it might preserve the text, but it's not necessarily preserving images or like Flash video. Flash video is definitely not being preserved. So lots of parts of the internet are just vanishing, which is fine because the internet's always producing more than we're losing. So the internet's always growing, but parts of the past are decaying, and we don't think about that in a way. And we definitely it's even harder to think about in physical spaces, because film needs to be kept, and it can't just be kept in a closet. It needs to be kept in like a humidity controlled space, and it needs to be tended to. It needs to be looked at. It needs to be preserved. Um, you know, Apollinaire said like we can't always be carrying our father's corpse. We need to abandon it with the other dead. And I think archiving is unnatural, but I think that's why it's valuable. And then even politically, like right now, it's like, oh no, we definitely need to be remembering the past. Like 100 billion%, we need to be remembering stuff and looking at evidence from the past so that we aren't repeating it so fervently. But yeah,
Well,
I think
two major things. You really helped me a lot on that because we're doing a big research project on archiving. And we've talked to some of the top archivists in LA. And one of them says, oh, everybody goes, oh, I've digitized that. Don't throw out your masters, And so then it's like, well, yeah, who's going to store your masters? So, I mean, I got really lucky, and my audio cassettes are stored in like you said, a temperature controlled building, and I got lucky. But most of the people I interview, Evan, I go, do you have plans for your own archive? And they go, I should. They don't, and they're not lucky. They don't get their college or whoever to. But before I go into that, this archivist taught me. Most people go, well, I have it on a hard drive, and she says, but most people don't know that you have to check the hard drive once a year and replace it every 10 years. True or false?
false. You need to do way more than that. Yeah, I
What is
mean,
it
most archivists will subscribe to the 3-2-1 rule. So you need to have your work on 3 different media. So you need to have it in like a redundant. Well, it's okay. You need to have it redundant to 3 different places. You need to have it on 2 different media types, and you need to have one of those offsite. So, like for example, let's say I make a movie. That movie exists on one hard drive. That's a mechanical platter hard drive on a computer. That's made redundant to a solid state drive, which is remembering the information slightly differently. So that's 2 different types of media formats. And then I'm going to redundant that to an offsite server. So like, let's say we just Google one of Google's cloud services or AWS or whatever. And so now my movie is local to my hard drive. It's with me. It's backed up to a different kind of hard drive. And then it's also backed up to the internet offsite. So it's 3, 2, 1.
Really?
And that's like bare minimum.
Does redundant mean migrate the media, move it to something else? Is that what redundant means in that regard?
Redundant means put it on both. Like it needs to be on
Yeah.
on all 3 places. Yeah.
Yeah, on all 3. Now, will the internet ever be turned off?
If the internet ever disappears for anything longer than a couple of microseconds, we have so many bigger problems than archives. Yeah.
But the question was, will it? Do you ever think the cloud or the internet will be gone, be turned off?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by the internet. Like, could Google ever fail? Yeah, probably at some point. But like there are people, like you can set up local mesh networks. You can set up lots of different things. Like a couple years ago, I built an apocalypse ready computer that I did a YouTube tutorial on, or like a show and tell on. That's like, here, this is a computer that if electricity were to go away and the internet were to go away, I could run a local server with like a bunch of PDFs and all of Wikipedia on it. And it's like, this is how to kind of restart stuff if we ever lost the internet in a real way.
Do you have plans for your own archive?
Oh, I specifically want my archive to just vanish. I want to, much like the Radiohead song, I want to disappear completely.
Wow. But you know it's important. Your film that's inspired by Gloria, that's almost as good as Gloria, isn't it?
Oh, that's very, very, very kind. But how much better is it that it's fleeting and that it's only around for a little while? And maybe after I'm gone, there's some weird bootleggers who are like bootlegging my experimental work. That's amazing. I love that. I think there's an expectation to like, you got to keep preserving stuff and keep preserving stuff. And I think the organic nature of preservation is that someone will preserve that for as long as it's culturally useful. And then after that, it's over. And I'm completely comfortable with that.
Yeah. Because we got into time and space the other day. Finnegan's Wake, page 12, it says, "We may see and hear nothing." And one of our scholars, or not scholars, just a lover of reading Finnegan's Wake, says, "The eye is space and the ear is time." Have you ever heard that breakup? And then this is Joseph Conrad. His ambition, as he explained in one of his stories, was to recreate and intensify reality by the power of the written word to make you hear, to make you feel. It is, before all, to make you see. And that is everything. So, you know, what Joyce did with Finnegan's Wake is he turned an eye experience into an ear experience. Because, you know, in a couple of your lectures on YouTube, you bring up Finnegan's Wake out of the blue, and I wonder if the students ever hear of it. I was like, this is amazing. I love to hear someone just say the 2 words and say the 2 words James Joyce. And you said nobody's ever read, or maybe you said nobody's ever read or nobody's ever understood Finnegan's Wake. I forget which one you said.
Probably understood. People have read it.
Right, because that's what my question is. Have you ever read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people? Not the whole thing, but with.
No, I've read sections out loud, and I've definitely heard sections read out loud by amazing performers for sure.
Yeah.
But never the whole text.
Right. Because then there's a book called Cannibal Joyce, and it maintains the dialogical relations in the wake, all variations on the war between antithetical principles represented by Sean and Shem, eye and ear, space and time, Philistine and artist, authoritism and freedom, death and life. So, death in the wake is the stone, life is the tree, and they're all unresolved.
They're all unresolved. Yeah.
So, what's the difference between time and space? Is it eye ear thing?
I think for most people they're the same thing, right? Like even as a fundamental fabric, we call it space time. They're bound. I don't know how one's going to have the other.
That is amazing, because then somewhere I found the Incas regarded space and time as a single concept.
Yeah, they are correct.
Pacha, that is amazing. PACH. But tell us your history of Joyce. Did you grow up being required to read Joyce in high school or college, or did you do it on your own?
So like a lot of some high schoolers, I read Portrait of the Artist in high school and fully didn't understand the relevant parts of it. And then in college, I had a really, really, really good professor named Corey Brown, who turned me on to a lot of different kind of like more experimental forms of writing.
Yeah.
And that sort of led swiftly to Joyce.
But that was Ulysses, Dubliners, all that, and the Wake, or did you focus more on the Wake?
You work your way up to the Wake. That has been my experience. That's a ladder you climb. Actually, just real quick, would I be able to just grab a drink of water and like go dark for 3 seconds? All right, please. I'll be right back.
And I'll just encourage people to check out Evan's website listed below, and you can just Google his name in YouTube and find lots of his work and lectures. And I was lucky because I saw his film, which was influenced by Hollis Frampton's short film called Gloria. And Gloria can be watched on YouTube as well, and it's contains some of the oldest footage of the theme in Finnegan's Wake, where someone who's fixing a roof falls off and dies. And then in the great tradition of Ireland, you celebrate with an open casket and a whiskey bottle goes flying across the room, drips water in the dead man's mouth. And because whiskey is etymologically the water of life, he wakes up, and then everybody goes, "You can't be awake, you're dead," and they beat him up. I mean, that footage in Gloria is amazing.
People get so frustrated when the dead walk again, man. They don't love it.
Yeah. And so just to go on Joyce for a second, when he says epiphanies and everydayness, what does that mean to you? What do you think he meant, and what does it mean to you?
Epiphanies in everydayness?
Yeah.
I honestly, again, trying to put my own spin on Joyce is like trying to, play one-on-one with Michael Jordan. It's really hard.
That's all right. I mean, I'm just curious what the words mean to you. That's right. Let's go to Portrait. He goes, "I will try to express myself in some mode of life or art as freely as I can and as wholly as I can, using for my defense the only arms I allow myself to use." So here's, he's using arms, the metaphor, like extending humanness. Words extend humanness. These 3 words: silence, exile, and cunning. What do those 3 words mean to you, or what do you think Joyce was meaning? Any thoughts on those 3 words?
I think that is the most intensely Irish answer, like weaponized Irish I've ever heard in my life. Like those 3 things of, silence, so you don't give away too much; exile, so you're away from all; and cunning, so you know when to come back, is like, that's perfect. And I feel a weird kinship with that, just with the last question of like, well, where does your archive go? It's like, oh, I want to disappear. I want to go into exile. I want to go to Elba. I'm out. So I think there's some value there.
Yeah, it's good, Evan. I appreciate that. That was really concise. And I appreciate how articulate you are. This is same book, Welcome, O Life. I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience and to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscious of my race. So I'm just curious more like, what's the smithy of my soul, the uncreated conscience of my race?
Maybe this is I've been living in the American South for a little while. There's like a really great saying that you hear sometimes where it's like, I'm gonna go think on that. And I
Oh,
honestly
yeah,
think
I like
I think that's what he's saying. Like I'm gonna go I'm gonna go into the crucible, go into my mind palace and use the tools available to kind of construct an idea.
yeah,
I'm gonna go think on that. A
that's
variation
good.
of I'm gonna go pray on that.
Why do you think Joyce was unique? Was it more DNA, more environmental, more his upbringing? How do you explain that? Or, any of these great artists that we look up to, Shannon, Hollis, Claude Shannon, Hollis Frampton, Joyce, just in any of their cases, more DNA, more environmental, more upbringing, more what?
I mean, I'm always a proponent of the upbringing. I think upbringing matters a lot. Um, but also I think that all of the people that you said have like the privilege to kind of work about in a way that they see fit, which isn't always the case. But also, when Joyce hit something and sort of expanded his voice, there wasn't anyone. I mean, that's not true. There were a lot of people telling him no, but he didn't listen to them all the time. And
Yeah,
he was able to understand that, like, I'm making something intensely personal for me. And if other people are along for the ride, that's great. And I think that that's a very, as an opposed to anesthetic, that's an incredibly aesthetic choice to be truthful and honoring the things you're interested in making, even if they might not be for everyone. Um, there's a game that came out earlier this year called Helldivers 2, which is a hugely satirical game about killing bugs and robots on other planets. But it's basically like if they took Verhoeven's take on Starship Troopers and made it into a game. Um, and on the company that made it, Arrowhead Studios, they're on their banner for their website. The quote that they have from their like CEO is, "A game for everyone is a game for no one." And I think we see that a lot in a lot of media. It's like something that it tries to appeal to everybody sucks,
yeah,
because it's going to be mindless and toothless and pointless, and it's just a mechanism for marketing and all those things. And I think that maybe too much, maybe the right amount, but Joyce was trying to market to nobody, and that's what was so interesting and refreshing. And that's why when you return to him, it's like, okay, well, I'm not being pandered to. I know that much, and let's see what I can do with this.
yeah.
Yeah.
It evokes two lines I wanted to tell you in part one. And here we are 9 years later, and I can tell you. One is Al Flipside. Don't sell out, sneak in.
That's awesome. I
And
love that.
here's Paul Schrader. The role of the artist is to attempt to sell out but fail.
I'm
Now
trying
that
to
one,
sell out, but no one's buying.
right, but that one's a little snarky because it's like you're saying, my art is so pure. I tried to sell out, but I failed. It's like, get over it, dude. So Elman, who's one of the great Joyce scholars, said we are learning to be Joyce's contemporaries. Both Frank Zappa and James Joyce said all times are happening now. This all at onceness, simultaneity. What do you, just your take on this? We're learning to be Joyce's contemporaries. Is it all times that are happening now, or is it him being a visionary or being a what? What is
Yeah.
that? We're Joyce's contemporaries. What is that?
I mean, it's a great way to say that Joyce was operating in the future, right? Joyce was playing that 5D chess. Gertrude Stein said like every artwork is a child of its age, but that sort
Yeah,
of predicates that every artist is kind of ahead of the age to
yeah,
produce for it. And I think that's true. I think there's a lot of artworks and games and products and stuff that you see, and you're like, wow, you are living in the future. I'm just visiting.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Joyce, and it did. It was giving us glimpses of where we were headed in an affirmed narrative micro dialect, kind of talked about, that was still relevant to people.
Yeah.
So I think that's, he's greetings from the future. I wish you were here, says Bill Brown. So
Bill Brown says that.
yeah, I know he's made more thoughtful films, but like when he made Roswell, that I talked about Roswell for like a year. I just told everyone I knew about this movie that I saw that made this huge impact on me. And incredible and lovely and beautiful. I still think it's an amazing piece of artwork. I put it up there with anything else.
I love it too. I've done 3 interviews with them, and so I hope our third part comes closer than 9 years later. But if it does, I'll wait around whenever you're ready for part 3, because I love Bill. And we should just do a salon someday of me, you, and him, and a couple other people. But what you just talked about there, Evan, reminded me of McLuhan saying the future ain't what it used to be. But I think Martha Graham kind of trumped us. She said, great artists aren't ahead of their times. They are their times.
Yeah.
So then that's that all times are happening now. That simultaneity kind of thing. So how many years you been teaching?
12.
12 years. How many years is it been good? Are you satisfied and you're going to stay with teaching till you retire, or what's your plan, Annie?
Yeah, I mean, working in any large bureaucracy has its challenges, but like the thing that always makes it worth it is the students. Like I genuinely have awesome students. They are great.
Yeah.
They're thoughtful and they're smart and they're inquisitive and they ask good questions and they're honest in ways that like sometimes I don't even know how to be.
Yeah.
So it's just really great to work with them and to sort of see and help and to go back to Joyce a little bit, to go. I think there's a thing that happens in academic art where you go into exile, right? Like it's really hard to be an academic artist and also like be out there traveling and doing the whole thing. But as it turns out, I don't love traveling. I don't love the whole thing, but I really do love helping people and I love helping students kind of figure that out. So that's great.
Yeah.
And then the other side of it is research. And I've kind of shifted over the years. And for the past like 3 years now, I've been working on kind of joint projects that have evolved into this kind of, I'm working with a group that's working with NASA. So we've been working for a few years on a couple of high altitude things. And in that time, like I've learned how to fly planes and I became a pilot, and I'm building things for them that are still like I consider them artistic. They're still creative design, but they're useful for them. And that's been really rewarding. And it's kind of nice because to say you're an artist, but you have like a very specific niche that you're building for, I don't think would fly in a lot of art schools, but in a large research university where they're really interested in how art and science can kind of come together and create praxis and create useful workflows that kind of like teach everyone, has been really good. And I'm lucky because I work with a group of people. I always joke, like every room I walk in, I'm the dumbest person, which just means I have all the most to learn, which is really, really wonderful. And they've been really accommodating and really interesting, and they'll explain stuff to me and I'll talk with them. But it's also not a one-way street, because it's not just like I'm learning about the science. Like I'll sit with them and I'll say like, all right, like let's talk about Barbara Kruger today. And they'll be like, okay, let's talk about Barbara Kruger today. And we'll go through and we'll talk about like hierarchy and design and color and elements like that, and how that can be translated to other things and what we can learn from that and what we can explore. It's been really, really valuable and wonderful.
So cool. So this is McLuhan on that very topic in 57. It's misleading to suppose there's any basic difference between education and entertainment. The distinction merely relieves people of the responsibility of looking into the matter. It's like setting up a distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other one pleases. However, it's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively.
I cannot agree with that more. 100,000,000%. Yeah, like we, without getting too far into it, that is kind of what I do with the engineering side, because as it turns out, we learn a lot better when we're playing a game. So that's effectively what I do. I teach people things, and I create systems where recognition can happen, and I make it in interactive or game like element, and that becomes a really productive learning environment. Because if you go to a lot of science spaces, a lot of what they'll do is they'll make PowerPoints, and they'll show you the PowerPoint. And I have to get in that room and say, hey, cool, do you know how long someone's paying attention to that PowerPoint slide? And they're like, well, I'm assuming they're reading the whole thing. And I'm like, they have 5 seconds of attention for that. And you need to prove to them that you have an additional 5 seconds. And that loop is what a game does really well. Because in a game, you're constantly making a choice, having that choice evaluated, and then making a new choice based on that evaluative change. So, going back to your earlier question, like, we want to create a system or technology that's always learning from experience. In that way, a game is kind of training us to learn from experience. It's creating an experience, we're acting, it's reacting to our action, and then we're building from that feedback loop new actions. Sometimes those actions are silly, like I'm making Mario jump when I fired my fire flower. I'm making that choice differently. But in a lot of really productive games, I think that learning onboarding and that ontology becomes really valuable.
Really good, Evan. And we're almost at the 90-minute point. Can you go a little longer, or you got to go?
I probably can give you 5 more after this, but I do have to run after that.
Because it's funny, because someone reacted to that. Whatever pleases teaches more effectively. Someone said, well, whatever displeases teaches more effectively, and so that was fun. But there is this thing about truth I wanted to go into, how you brought up the word truth again, and we went into the Louis Buñuel line. I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it. And most people go, I agree with that. And then one person goes, no, that's bullshit, because if I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it. So I morphed it into, if the journey's more important than the destination, why do we have to name or seek a destination if the journey's more important?
My gut answer there, which is not good, is that capitalism teaches us that everything needs to be productive.
Yeah.
And we get really uncomfortable in the West when we do stuff that's unproductive, which is why it's important to do 10 minutes of unproductive shit every day.
Yeah.
Just to engage on the same, like there are definitely some days where I'm gonna pick an hour and just do whatever my dog does. Like if my dog's laying down for an hour, I'm gonna go lay down for an hour. If he's on the porch looking out and smelling flowers, I'm gonna go do that too.
Yeah, but then the flaneurs in Paris in the 20s changed the world forever, and they were psychogeography slackers. They just sat there, and that's when Joyce came up with, they just had an epiphany in everydayness. So you could be laying on the floor next to your dog and have an epiphany, but you didn't like set out. It's back to what's the best thing for a human being is to relax. Yes. And so, there's 2 comments, because we didn't really dive into death and dying. And we talked so much about that in part 1. I just wanted you to hear these 2 and any reaction. This is Louis Kemp, who hung out with Dylan when he was 10. They were both 10 years old. Then he worked for Dylan a little, but he's really a hardcore kind of religious guy now. And he said, you can't take it with you, but you can send it ahead. Kind of this, you can't take this stuff with you. You can just send it ahead. But, Bernice from Sweet Honey in the Rock just died. And she said, I was here before I came. And when I die, I'm not leaving.
That's sick.
That's like, it reminds me of Krasner. He says, I only believe in reincarnation in one of my past lives.
I mean, I don't think you can send it ahead. I think you can send it back. Right. Like,
right.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like I mean, I don't know anything about legacy, but I think that a lot of people are trying to build monuments, and we should just be building gifts to give each other. That's the thing. Like to go back to Joyce, like in Ireland's Bill of Rights, their version of it, one of the bills, a thing that indicates poverty, like a thing that the social net catches, is you need to be able to give a gift to a friend from time to time. And like that is so incredibly thoughtful that built into the fabric of the Constitution is this idea that like you should be giving something to your peers.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can send it ahead. I don't even know where you'd address that sort of thing, but I do know you can sort of send it back and send it laterally and give things to people and say, hey, use this if it's useful.
Well, I'm like your students. I think what you've taught me will resonate forever and ever. So, couple more and we're out of here. What's a question that remains unresolved for you?
It's both simple, but also like the most truthful one is like, all right, when am I going to allow myself to rest, and when am I going to feel good about that?
Yeah. And feel good about it.
Yeah.
Let's do two, like in regards, how has being an artist and how has being an educator shaped your behavior?
I think it's made me think about access quite a bit and equity. I think that especially working at a large institution, I think it's imperative that you work hard so that all students can access your work in a productive way. So, like, if I have students who have hearing issues, vision issues, neurodiversity, how can you make your classes as reasonable, as accessible to anyone who might access it slightly differently? And that's actually had a pretty big impact on how I make work, I think. So first off, like I'm now kind of very accessibility minded. I'm really interested in how that plays in. So I don't want to make a game that not everyone can play. I'm okay making a game that not everyone will enjoy. That's a completely different thing. But I think working towards creating access is really interesting. But also just ontologically and structurally, a lot of times I want to write something or make something that's a little more flowery, and I want to get like into the filigree, and I want to make it really decorative for me. And sometimes I'll share it with someone in my life, and they'll just say like, you're doing 20 things when one will do. Just do the one.
Yeah.
So that's a thing. I think like you putting your effort in the right spot is what education teaches educators. So I think that's it for artists too.
It's so amazing because I wanted to shoot this line in somewhere. David O'Reilly spoke at Ann Arbor one year, and he says, "Fuck storytelling. It's all about empathy." Is that
uh,
is that similar to what you just said or not?
it's similar but better. Yeah, David's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I still teach mountain in my courses because it's just really hard to beat.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about empathy. There's the quote that games are empathy machines, which I think they are. Yeah.
You mean, is that applied to all games or just video games?
I think all games. I firmly and will go to the mat. I will die on the hill that everyone should play a tabletop role playing game in their life. I think that the first character you make when you're being told, "Hey, I want you to create a hero," is more therapeutic than like your first 5 sessions of therapy because they're going to teach you who you think you are.
Yeah.
And I've seen this across the board. Like your first D&D character is who you are trying to be as a person.
Yeah.
And it's always wonderful and it's always beautiful. And I think that there's so much to be learned in a game space because it creates safety. You can
Yeah.
try things out in a way that you can't in your everyday life.
It's amazing because Walter Pater says all music is all art aspires to the condition of music. Like sculpture, poetry, painting, everything wishes it could be as cool as music. Well, you know why? Because you play music. You don't work music. And it's funny, you're in a medium, you play
You play
games.
games. Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, what gives you the most optimism?
Unexpected changes.
Oh God, that is so. You know, It's really been enlightening, Evan, and I appreciate your time. Wilhelm, the first question I asked you in part 1, 9 years ago, what's the best thing for a human being? Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being. The last question is, what gives you the most optimism? That's what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life, and he says, other people. So it's sure been fun spending this time with another person, especially because it was you, Evan. Thank you so much.
Jerry, thank you. As always, this is always tremendous and wonderful and beautiful, and you've given me a whole week's worth to think about in just 90 minutes.
Yeah, well, I hope we can keep talking forever and ever, even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button. Thank you, Evan.
Jerry, take care.
All right.